Welcome everyone into the Bridgestone Canadian Superbike Championship podcast. Thank you for being with us as always. It is the round number 4 recap. I can't believe we're already done round number 4. It has been fast and furious even after having a break between rounds number 3 and number 4. Marshall Ferguson alongside Colin Fraser as always, breaking it down for you. Atlantic Motorsport Park was the scene, Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia. Colin, I actually got to see the track. That was the highlight of the entire thing. I said to you when we were doing a voiceover session for our CSBK work, I guess a week and a half or so ago, I can't wait to see what this thing looks like because it's only my second year, obviously, calling the series. First year doing this podcast. And last year, I didn't make it inside the bridge. The biggest shocker, I guess, when I got there was you've been telling me for a while how unique and fun and different this place is. You took me out in the rental car when we got there. This place is awesome. Uh, I loved it. As soon as I got there and you started taking me through all of the corners, I just thought, wow, we are really lucky to be able to be out and have some fun at this place. But it was an amazing experience on my end, first time being there. So thank you to everybody, whether you were local or fans that came by or people in the paddock and all the rest. That was a really, really fun round for me.
I think it's interesting. It's track we've been going to in various versions for 50 years, not CSBK, because CSBK started in 1980. But the track first hosted auto racing, a Formula Atlantic event, which featured many of the stars of the day in 1974. So the anniversary is actually, I believe, next month. And I've been trying to pick up some data on that. But unfortunately, the historian is a car guy. He wasn't at the Bike National. So at some point, I'm going to build out a little bit in terms of our knowledge. But we've been going there for a long time. The first time I raced there was 79, and the first time I ran a race there was 81. And the
Wow.
first time we were televised there, I think, was 87, probably, with what was CTV's Wide World of Sports, which is really kind of the precursor of TSN because TSN is owned by CTV and they were the licensee of ABC's Wide World of Sports. So, yeah, we've been going for a while and it has an incredible history. It's in a strange place because it's very much a local knowledge place for so long time. It was whoever the hot guy was regionally was the guy to beat. And then gradually the national guys got to know the track. And then it became the place where the new national riders loathed to go because they were behind the 8 ball in terms of knowledge compared to the national regulars and the local guys. And the most famous local was a 90s guy named Don Monroe, who was a Honda Kawasaki rider. And he was very, very difficult to beat at Atlantic Motorsport Park and built quite the reputation founded on that particular track. And the only other track I've ever been to that's anything like that, except for a couple of places in the UK, is a place it's since been replaced by a stock car track in New Hampshire, which is called Loudon. It was actually Briar Motorsport Park. And I believe the designer of Briar put it on the edge of a hill, just the way the designer of Shubenacadie put it in a valley. And it was actually Don Monroe's brother dad, Dave, and a guy named Jack Canfield, who skipped part of a regional race at an airport and went and looked at the property and decided they could build a track there and then pulled together all the
Wow.
local clubs. So it was very much specific to that region. And it's quite remarkable the track has persisted all this time.
And they've done a pretty good job of upkeep in terms of like when people talk about grip, and I found that interesting as you were taking me out about basically the way that it flows and obviously having the actual hills and the weaving in the bot. Like we know what we're getting into obviously with CTMP coming up in round number 5 in the Bridgestone CSBK, but we spent essentially the last 2 podcasts when we were, whether it was preview or recap, talking about Grand Bend and Rad Torque in Edmonton being those point and shoots, right? Where it was like try to basically with Ben Young, like straighten it up and go as fast as you possibly could. It's not that you can't do that, obviously, at AMP, but I just love the idea that it felt so different to me as somebody who's never raced. Like just watching it and seeing the way that everyone's bodies were kind of responding to it. I also found it funny that everybody, maybe outside of a couple of people, maybe one person who has the number 1 plate that I spoke to essentially said in Edmonton, oh my God, this is exhausting. This track just beats your body up, man. This is one of the hardest places I've ever been to. And we got out to Atlantic Motorsport Park and everyone was like, this is way harder than Rad Tour in terms of on the body and never being able to take a break. Even Jordan Zoke, when I talked to him, essentially said, there's nowhere to rest around here. You just have to keep going at all times and set yourself up for the next corner. And the one that blew my mind, I think, was the actual finish of the lap where I never watched from the bottom of that hill because I was essentially at the end of the front straight into turn 1 most of the weekend. But the way that those guys would come over the corner and the comfort level of getting that front wheel off the ground and going, I don't know, 100, 200 meters just on the back tire and trying to find grip and get it back down so you can go. It feels like it was it required a lot of different people. And then you factor in the fact that, I don't know, Sam Graham went for a couple of tumbles here and there, and people were rebuilding things all over the place. And so yeah, it was extremely entertaining. And by the way, I do want to mention that obviously everybody who listens to this podcast, they're not all bots. And that was confirmed because I ended up getting multiple questions of, "Oh, are those the shoes that Colin bought you?" That I mentioned on the preview podcast, to which I said, "No, I packed those shoes. They didn't make it here because I ended up sprinting to the plane in my dress shoes, and then very quickly, once on the plane, went, oh, I guess I'm wearing these for the next 36 hours because I didn't have anything else that was there with me." So it was a bit of an adventure coming from other responsibilities. But let's get into how the weekend actually unfolded. I dive bombed in on Sunday. I was not there for Saturday. I was getting messages from people all throughout the weekend, yourself included, pictures of torrential downpours on Thursday, and then seeing how it cleaned up on Friday. And then we head into Saturday. And give us the synopsis from your perspective, Colin, on, let's just start with, I guess, first and foremost, the Economy Lube and Tire Pro Sport Bike division, which Mavrick Cyr goes on to a dominant victory.
So in the middleweight division, we've been touting the youngsters, and at the front of that list frequently is Cyr. Cyr's pedigree is a little different. He is not sort of a pending hero. He already has won 2 amateur national titles. So he's the guy with the expectations, and he's the guy who's gone from triumph to in my opinion, superior choice with the Economy Lube Ducati. And this is his second weekend on the bike, so he's starting to get a hang of it. At Edmonton, he had some adventures, and I'm sure it's weird to go to Shubenacadie trying to calm down your program, because normally things just get a lot stranger, as Sam Garant demonstrated. But no, Cyr was super impressive. He got a good start. He probably benefited slightly from pole sitter Lang not having the race pace I'm sure Lang would have liked to have, and therefore by extension, perhaps holding people back a bit. And everybody's leery to ever say that about someone like Lang, because, of course, at Mosport, he could be the guy who's running away. So you don't want to antagonize him and motivate him. And Lang motivates himself pretty well anyway. But it's certainly from the Tremblay point of view. And Tremblay is, in my opinion, still our benchmark guy on the Suzuki GSSR 750 from Turcotte Performance. He had a shoulder issue at Edmonton, so didn't do particularly well, but was doing well in the points because Elliot Vieira has been struggling. Elliot Vieira, here's news, continues to struggle through no fault of his own. The bike overheated. It was interesting hearing from Elliot what the very advanced electronics on the Ducati do. They kind of gently warn you you're overheating. Then they more aggressively warn you that apparently the entire dashboard wishes you to cease what you're doing. And Elliot said it's very difficult when you're in the back of a group of people to maintain airflow. It's kind of a Formula One thing, what happens in the draft. Also, easy to get lost in the shuffle because of the time of year we go to Nova Scotia, just brutally hot and humid. And for the riders, that's really hard. But, for the bikes, you boost the ambient temperature. It just means the air going through the radiator is that much hotter. And in some cases, it's going through an oil rad and a water rad, and the packaging's really tight on the Ducatis. It's just incredible how everything's just jammed into the smallest possible space. So it's not a shock. And I don't remember exactly where Vieira said he got to, but in the reference of our current world, it's warm enough to blow the head gasket on a GSXR 750 because, of course, what happened to Ben Young in race 2 at Shannonville on Sunday when
Right.
he was contending for the win and had that rad hose pop because of overheating.
Yeah, and that's an issue that I guess if you are Vieira, it becomes all that much more disappointing because of the onboard issues that you've essentially had, like not mechanical stuff throughout the last couple of rounds. But for Mavrick Cyr to run away like that, when I showed up on Sunday and I got there and I went and saw him, I said, "Hey man, congratulations! I'm sorry I wasn't here to see it. I'm really excited to call that race and to see exactly what you did." And I basically just said to him, how did it just feel like it clicked? Like you felt like you were in control? And he basically just shrugged and went, "Yeah, everything was perfect." I'm like, you don't very often hear that from anybody where it's like these guys are so critical of the smallest things in performance where it's like, yeah, it was really good, but, and he literally said, "No, I'm just so happy. It was so smooth." And obviously the times showed that.
So I'm flipping through some of the data I've been working on for the TSN broadcast.
Mhm.
So Sears' best race on best lap on Saturday was a 108.9. He was the only guy in the eights, and obviously that's barely an eight. all the others, Tremblay, Van Winkle, Phil, and Lang, were in the mid 109s, point 0.2 between the four guys I just mentioned, but half a second back from Cyr.
Wow.
So whether he got a break at the start or made the smartest moves of his life, heavy on gas with new tires at the start, however you want to block that out, in his third start on the Ducati, he managed the race the way Jordan Zoke has managed races historically.
Yeah, and that makes it all that much more impressive for him. You know, as much as we talk about the disappointment and frustration of Vieira, for Mavrick Cyr to do this after switching over this bike, like you say, and to have that comfort level and to be able to manage it, what does that tell you about him moving forward?
Well, I think we expected him to become a contender the way he's been riding early in the season, and we're just past halfway. Suggested he was capable. Now he's had the win, so now he's one of the boys. And it was interesting seeing how people like Tremblay related to him. And you know, Tremblay is the elder statesman. He's raced all these great young riders coming up, and some of them are gone now, like Card, and some of them went to Superbike and only occasionally race now, like Thomas Kazaz. But nonetheless, he's seen all of these guys, and he seemed to be very welcoming towards Cyr and wanted to establish that they were, if not equals, at least on the same track, cooperating together. And Tremblay is kind of the host of that class in the same way that Ben Young is very much the host of our Bridgestone Pro Superbike feature class.
Yeah, so a sign of respect there from Sebastian Tremblay, no doubt. Let's move on to what happened in the Superbike race, which again, gonna lean on you for this one, Colin, because it seemed like there was a whole lot going on.
Well, and unfortunately, it's become a trend of ours that we roll out a superbike race and it starts to rain and then we scramble. And the rules are fairly specific. You have 20 minutes to do what you need to do. And in many cases, that's actually just the spare bike. A lot of the top guys have a second bike, so they can just have that ready for the rain. So it takes some of the pressure off. For the midfield guys, it means they're scrambling with wheels and tires and off to the Bridgestone trailer and figuring it out. Then we have a fairly new rule, which we call 5 and 5. If we haven't had practice in the rain, then you have 5 minutes of wet practice, 5 minutes in the pits to figure out what you're doing. Now, there's two configurations we have for a race. There's a dry race, you run the slicks. There's a open race when you make your best decision. And Shubenacadie on Saturday in Pro Superbike definitely was a case of open because the track was wet, but it wasn't soaked. And in the way that these things always play out, the front straight was wetter than any other part of the track.
Right.
So what they saw was far more rainy. The back half was drying fast. So famously, a few years ago, Jordan Zoke gambled, switched bikes after the warm-up lap to a weird tire configuration, and ended up coming from behind to win. And that was a race where he battled Sam Grant, pretty famous race. If you want to go find it on YouTube, I believe it's 2020 at Motorsport at the height of COVID. In this case, the person who took the crazy tire gamble, although a lot of people considered it, including our points leader, Ben Young, but as the points leader didn't want to take the risk, Jordan Zoke almost did it, but it was Sam Grant who went with the odd tire choice and was probably very entertained in the early laps. And Sam's pretty entertaining frequently, but I think that it takes a lot of judgment to go with a mixed tire choice, and that's what Grant opted to do, and it got him the win. And he said on the podium Saturday, he was just praying for that race to end. It's interesting that most of the guys plateaued their lap times mid-race as the track sort of got established as a dry track. Garant's fastest lap was his last lap. So he rode
Wow.
into those conditions. And you can only have so much data and so much knowledge and so much electronic setup when you're mixing and matching tires. There is no magic plan. That's rider feel. That's old school. And bizarrely, the guy who looks after the bike for Garant, Steve Beattie, is a famous flat tracker, and you can't get much more old school in terms of how you ride a bike. So if anyone appreciates that opportunity, it's Beattie, and he's definitely a hardcore roll up your sleeves, let's race kind of guy, and probably was quite accepting that Sam gambled. Now, I can't help but think that Sam came out on the short end of a similar situation years ago at Mosport, has probably been in his mind all this time that pit lane start when nobody thought Jordan was even in the race and he ended up winning it, that showed you what could work. Now, the conditions were much worse at Mosport. These conditions got better faster, but nonetheless, Garant hung on in the early going. And, we see this a lot, say, in F1. We saw it a little bit in Silverstone a week ago. But the difference is you can't fall off a Formula One car.
Yes. Yeah. Major difference in terms of the risk that's being taken. Have you heard, have you talked to anybody about what the actual decision-making process was for Sam? Because I'm intrigued by the dynamics within that team because Steve obviously wants to have his say and wants to be able to lead Sam the right direction. But Sam is very much his own man. Like he has his own opinions, his own beliefs and things and all the rest. So, do you know how they came to that decision?
I think it was Sam wanting to and Steve agreeing with it. And that Sam had already had two incidents, and I believe they were related to some pretty basic setup issues with. And when I don't mean normally when I say setup, I mean spring rates and fork and shock adjustments. In this case, I mean literally the layout of the motorcycle because they moved some things around. I believe the thumb brake was changed, and that caused Sam to interfere with the traction control buttons, which kind of looks like a PlayStation on the left clip on. So eventually they moved some of that to better places, so he was less likely to bump one thing while trying to adjust the other. But and by the way, going into a race after you've been struggling with those sorts of problems
Yeah.
with a bizarre tire choice is a big gamble. But I think it shows that they've come a long way as a team. That they now think of themselves as winners, and they need to, you know. Block out a path that they think could take them to first. And at Edmonton, they had some help from an Australian engineer who was working with them with fuel injection and traction control and everything. And I think a lot was learned, but part of what was learned is that Sam is very old school, and we have a fair number of old school guys, Jordan Zoke, and as it turns out, bizarrely, Alex Dumas, who's all of 21, don't like a lot of electronic interaction. They prefer to feel the throttle more, which is risky, but in theory might give you a benefit. And just to frame it further down the line, in world racing, no one will let you ride a motorcycle like that anymore. It's just too risky when you have, world superbikes at 220 horsepower and MotoGP bikes at 260 horsepower. It's just too dangerous to handle the bike with a unrestricted throttle. And by the way, Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia is not anybody's idea of the place to go with an unrestricted throttle, but that's what these guys are comfortable with. And comfort is so much of this, and you can look at the data and graph it out and chart it and discuss it Friday night, Saturday night. But in the end, the rider has to be comfortable and he has to be making his own choices. But yeah, we weirdly in Canada have a lot of people, including some young people, who prefer not to get too deeply into the electronics in terms of controlling the behavior of the motorcycle.
As a former racer yourself, before we had all of this crazy electronic stuff, you have to appreciate that, right?
I mean, this is where being an old guy really comes into play in a bad way because learning some of the things I managed to learn, not having to use the clutch doesn't take long to be very comfortable not having to deal with that. Slipper clutches, auto blip, all that stuff is terrific. But the opening the throttle all the way at the apex of a corner, I can't do it. One of the fathers said something about how he's a flat slide guy in terms of his thinking is based on the old performance flat slide carburetors. I am absolutely also a flat slide guy. So you cross the power curve with the torque curve, and you're looking down at the motorcycle from a height, and that is not a recoverable incident. So I have huge respect for where we've come with the electronics. The bikes definitely don't crash as much. The riders save it far more often. But if you watch the TSN broadcast, it doesn't promise that you won't fall down, and sometimes it means that the incident you have is much more spectacular because you've chased the bike. And one of the problems in racing is the pro guys hang on, right? An amateur guy will probably fall. A pro guy, maybe he saves the first couple of moments and gets into an even worse situation.
Yes, absolutely. Let's.
And by the way, that's Sam Garant potentially on Saturday, right?
Yeah, and
He
that was a huge risk that he took certainly, and was chasing that thing a little bit. But I do want to ask you before we move on to Sunday's events, about Ben Young on Saturday. Obviously, as the championship leader, and the fact that he obviously has made his way to Suzuka now. He's in Japan at this point. We knew that that was part of his mindset going in. Um, you had mentioned to me when we were at the track that when he was out there on Saturday in the wet conditions, that might not have been the most aggressive thing, whether that's the tire decision before the race began. But when he was out there and he was on the bike, he looked incredibly comfortable as somebody who was out basically for a rip to try and accomplish everything he could given the circumstances.
Well, if you think that Ben needs to be cautious, that as the top gun in our series, as the points leader, he always has a target on his back. He's the benchmark. That's all true. That he has to get on a plane when no one else does to go to Japan. That's on his mind. The other guys all know that, so that's a risk. But it was interesting. The early laps of Pro Superbike on the drawing track at AMP on Saturday, Ben was at points mid-pack. The group was pretty close together, and you could see him, coming over the top of the hill onto the front straight, not using anywhere near all the track, clearly not pushing hard, doing the wheelies, but not aggressively so, just letting the bike do what it wants to do, maybe making some adjustments, getting some feel for what the tire likes with the track, and just very, very comfortable in a situation that really was the worst case for him, being
Yeah.
surrounded by other guys, and they all know who he is, right? There's no one you want to beat more than Ben Young. But I also believe, we saw the best of Ben Young and that he judged that very well. And we also saw the reality of what happens when you're a Ben Young type racer and you're leading the points, and you know that gamble Garant took could work. Ben probably, if it was round one, might have taken it.
Yeah.
But he's not going to, because he's in a really solid situation. And if you're kind of wondering if we're overplaying the cards, well, Sunday suggests that's where Ben was.
Yeah, and after Sunday's result, which we'll get to in a second, that was what I heard from a variety of different people was if Saturday was the same conditions as Sunday, we might have seen Sunday times two because that's how comfortable Ben was in the best conditions. By the way, the red leathers this year, just like waving it like a matador for everybody else to come and try and get him. Certainly, it's not like Ben's going to be able to hide. Not that he ever could, but the red leathers I feel like have certainly up the ante where you come around the corner and you go, oh yeah, there's that guy. Okay, let me try to track him down. So it's been fun to watch Ben throughout this year, and certainly the way that you speak of him just being that comfortable and playing it the smart way on this weekend in race number one was interesting. The battle in Sport Bike Sunday I thought was the best theater. And again, I wasn't there to see Saturday and Superbike and the changing tires and the conditions and all the rest, but this Van Winkle kid's pretty good, huh? He's a
Well,
lot of fun, and so is Sebastian Tremblay.
Well, the interesting thing, I think, is these young guys, and we talk a lot about them, and unfortunately, sometimes we talk about them as a modular group, which they certainly aren't, although a lot of them are from the West. They all have a very clear understanding. You got to go to Shuby, you got to pour the laps through, you got to pound it out, you got to figure it out. That everybody likes to make excuses for why things didn't go well, but until you figure out how to ride Shubenacadie, you can't win a championship.
Mm.
And we saw a couple. Well, Cyr doesn't complain about anything to do with Shuby, and his dad's a racer, his grandfather was a racer. They definitely have the culture of how you go racing in their heads. But yeah, Van Winkle with very little experience, period. He's 17 years old. He was racing mini bikes 2 years ago. Yes, he won a title last year, but it was a very bumpy ride and it wasn't a deep class. But Van Winkle, who really before Edmonton, who knew how any of that was going to go riding on that Sousa bike, that is working remarkably well, and he is. As much as there's lots of people to talk about, and Collins, who won at Edmonton in Superbike, wasn't at AMP at all, and Collins attracted a lot of attention because of what happened at Edmonton. But I think Van Winkle should at least be in that conversation. He hasn't raced in Europe. He doesn't have a ride in the United States. He's piecing it together as best he can. And his Shubenacadie, he looked like he'd been riding there forever. He looked fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Shout out to Marco Souza, by the way, for helping him out with the bike in that spot, because the fact that Souza has done that has allowed us to get access to seeing Andrew Van Winkle put his talents on display. So that I personally, as a broadcaster, somebody who loves great storylines, huge appreciation to him for doing that and helping out. But I do think that like seeing Van Winkle in Edmonton, you could see like the pure pace, right? You could understand that he looked pretty comfortable. He looked like he was in a totally different level, even from Edmonton at various points throughout this weekend, including in this race on Sunday in the Econolube entire pro sport bike division. He ends up basically off the start, like just hopping it and wheeling and bouncing, and everybody's going past him. And I thought, ah, man, that's a really tough spot to be in, because it reminded me a little bit, not as dramatic as Rad Torque race number one on the Saturday, where he didn't have a great start. Everybody flies around. And then it was basically John Lang just ran away. And then you see what Cyr did in race number one at AMP. And I thought, oh, okay, he made a mistake off the front. And he's kind of shaking his head as he's going down into turn one. And then it was just pure speed and daring moves and down into the bottom of turn two and on the outside of turn four. I mean, even like Frank Wood calling things up in the tower, he's just consistently going, and here comes Van Winkle, like lap after lap after lap. And it turned into this incredible battle towards the end against Sebastian Tremblay. And as you've said, Tremblay being kind of the host and the elder statesman in this class and setting the tone, chasing down Van Winkle. I did hear that the final move that ended up getting Tremblay the victory was clean, was all good. Nobody had any complaints on any side. Anybody that saw it said, nope, just great racing, which is fantastic. But apparently, Andrew Van Winkle did say, if I wanted to make that a mess, I might have been able to hold on, but I'm not really that guy. Like, I'm not interested in trying to stick anything out and try to hold my spot. It's crazy to me how great he looked. And I hate that we're not talking more about Tremblay, but it's the reality, like how great Van
Oh,
Winkle
so
looked at
Tremblay
17.
won, so it's not
Yes,
like Tremblay was ignored, but
right.
let's get into the nitty-gritty,
Yep.
right? Their best laps were basically 109 flat, which is remarkable in a middleweight bike. And the difference between Tremblay and Van Winkle's best lap, Tremblay was fastest, he won the race, was 0.03, which is essentially nothing. But if you were to watch that and say, find the local rider, I think you'd say it was Van Winkle just from how he performed. And also, you can move up. Our races aren't long. They're just long enough that you can maybe fix a bad start. So yeah, Van Winkle had his work cut out for him. And I agree, it did not look positive initially. You were thinking, maybe a podium if he can keep his optimism up, which it's easy to get discouraged at Shubenacadie. It's so easy to make a couple little mistakes, lose a second. And in our current climate, the guys are riding so consistently, which is, the high water mark of what you look for in good riders, that Shubenacadie is just brutal if you make a mistake or you have a problem. And of course, a bad start is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that should be kind of read into from, I guess, the conclusion of Sport Bike on this weekend?
Well, Vieira rode one of his bikes. He didn't ride the bike that overheated on Saturday. He rode one of his Ducatis on Sunday that they hadn't really spent any time with, and I think that they were kind of saving that bike for Mosport, and they were happy with that. It ran fairly well. So I think that is worth mentioning that we're looking forward to Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, and what the battle at Sport Bike is going to be, and it's going to be tough for Van Winkle. He's probably about 10 horsepower down, but on the flip side, Phil de Gama Blanchette, who was like out in every session for every lap and rode like a madman the whole time and had some pretty good results. His bike is probably 8 or 9 horsepower ahead of where Van Winkle's is. So I'd be interested to see where Phil winds up, or I can't remember all the nicknames we're working on with Phil right now. But
I
yeah,
heard you negotiating with him about nicknames at what point, so.
he doesn't like Philistine, for instance. I don't know why that is, but Phil the Beast.
Yes.
Just to be clear, that is the official nickname, Phil
Okay.
the Beast, and we are working on various nicknames for other people, but that seems to be the one we're dug in on with him. But yeah, he wrote a lot and he learned a lot at Shuby, and we didn't mention him about Saturday's wet superbike race. At one point, I thought he could win it. I
Wow.
thought that's where he was. I think his on lap 10 or 11 of 18, the fastest lap was him on his ZX6. And obviously, he doesn't have the other 70, 80 horsepower the other guys do. But on a slippery track, he didn't fall down and he was battling, with the top riders in the country. And, Jordan Zoke, we haven't talked about him hardly at all. But boy, has he ever got his groove back.
Yeah.
This is old Jordan at a track he's done so well at. Didn't win, but good results. And heading to Mosport, where he has almost always found a way to win if he's even halfway in decent shape physically and his bikes are running. So there are some interesting storylines. I mean, everybody's scared of Ben Young at Mosport because he was so impressive last year.
Yeah, so that's all things pro sport bike. Let's dig into Jordan a little bit here, and also the dominant result of the final Superbike race of the week in the GP Bikes Pro Superbike feature class on Sunday, race number 2, which makes it race number 8 of the calendar that we have had. And in this one, coming out of it, Cam Bickle from CSBK.ca kind of said to me, "What's your prediction? What do you think might happen in this race?" And I said, "It's interesting. I haven't really thought about it all that much." And he goes, "I think just Ben does the damn thing." Essentially, is what Cam said to me. He's like, "I think this is going to be one of those." And when Ben came out, and I actually regret not asking him about this, so I apologize. And obviously he's dealing with Suzuka things, so he doesn't really care about this at this point and how the race ended. But I wondered if he almost missed a shift or what happened, because Sam Garan's start on Sunday was unbelievable from where I was standing right at the basically entrance to turn number 1. Ben was so slow coming out of there. Sam was so fast. He almost had to veer around him, gets the whole shot from the second row, flies up in between Alex Dumas and Jordan Zoke. And then all of a sudden, start looking at the race monitor, the lap times, and it's 1084, 1084, 1085, 1085, 1084, 1085, 1085. and you start seeing Ben just picking off, get out in front, and as soon as he had that clear air, man, his consistency and his ability to lay down those lap times, it just felt unparalleled. We'll get to Zoke in a second, but first, I just want your thoughts on Ben and what he did on Sunday.
Well, first of all, the racers can't parse each other's times. They're busy as best they can with their own data because it's so hard to ever digest it at Shubenacadie because there's so little time to look at anything. Young qualified at a 107.5, very similar to what he did the year before in our abbreviated qualifying before the bridge washed out and the race washed out.
Yeah.
Young's race pace, as you hinted at, was a 108.4 was his best, which is in terms of race time at Shuby, really, really good. And then the other guys were a little off that, but not as consistent. And that was the thing that led to that big win. And I think it was around 10 or 11 seconds. Was just he years ago he came from behind and won at Shubenacadie in a very famous race 2019, and he pounded out a whole bunch of mid 108s when very few people had done more than two or three of them, and it was just the mark of where he got to in his career, and also his comfort with the BM and the electronics and all of that stuff. Um, I kind of figured a good day with everything working the way it should. Ben is going to throw down before Suzuka because he wants these guys to remember, right? In case you were thinking I had softened up on you a little bit. I hope he has a good time at Suzuka. I hope his lap times are competitive. We're going to do our best to link people up with I believe there's an English language way to watch the 8 hour.
Awesome.
And I expect Ben will ride the third shift, so he'll be fairly deep into the race. So hopefully his teammates don't have any adventures and Ben gets into the race. But yeah, Ben in theory, comes off a win at Shubi, has a really good run in the International World Championship 8 hour in Suzuka, Japan, comes back to Mosport, and then his goal is to do what he did last year, which is completely dominate. And at the time, the new M seemed to have an advantage. It may be aerodynamic. There's been a lot of debate about that. But regardless, at a track where we expect slipstreaming battles, Ben Young controlled three races in a row last year. Now there's only two this season, but Ben in his mind believes he's coming back to Mosport to dominate.
Yeah, and I spoke to Scott Cartier, who works on that Van Wilder's home team BMW of Ben Young, and I basically said he's always been in good shape. He's always been somebody who's cared about the shape that he's in. He looked in that race the way that he attacked it and the consistency he laid down. I'm standing next to the Bridgestone guys that are at the track taking care of everybody all weekend, and they were shaking their head going, man, he's laying this down to lap after lap after lap. So I asked Scott, is he actually in better shape right now than he has been at various points in the past? And he said, yes. Scott's close to him. He sees him all the time. He said, yeah, he's in fantastic shape. Obviously, Suzuka is a great motivator for that, but also he has been altering his training. Going into Daytona, drops some weight because everybody's running the same spec down there in that GSXR 750. Then he's like, okay, I'm coming into Suzuka. I need to be able to do this. I need to do that. I need to get myself prepared this way. And it's all of this stuff, regardless of how he's shifting his training, appears to be helping everything he's doing in CSBK because it's just pushing him and it's turning him into a better and better rider. So it was dominant. But as you say, being able to have a great battle in behind was Alex Dumas and Jordan Zoge. At one point, by the way, and I'm excited to see it on the TSN broadcast because I know our man Cam McFadden is going to end up finding this. Alex Dumas either dipped his knee or a tire onto the grass going down into turn one, and you and I both saw it, and everybody that I was standing next to was like, whoa, here he goes. But then you end up having Jordan Zoge get into a podium position, and a lot of people, maybe nostalgia otherwise, that love Jordan, that were out there seeing him on the podium. It felt like there was a ton of support for him on the East Coast. And he really does seem to be more comfortable than he has been in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jordan had that terrible motocross injury. He missed a season. The broken bones and whatnot were substantial, but it was really an internal infection, which is far more frightening than a broken bone,
Yes.
is what had the most influence on what's been going on. And of course, Jordan, who arguably was the fittest of the fit, and his various conditioning regimes and his bicycle racing and his trials riding and all of that stuff. He's on two wheels all the time. He hasn't been able to do very much of that. He's starting back down that road, and Jordan's just about to have twins, so he may not have as much time for exercise coming up. But yeah, he seems to be in good shape, and he looks a lot more like the Jordan of old. He still limps a bit, but a lot of us have that problem.
By the way, I did ask him about the delivery of his children coming up and supposed to be in and around close to all things CTMP. And I said, so like, how are you going to handle that? You know, that's a lot to juggle and family coming in, all the rest. And he kind of shrugged and goes, Daddy's got to go to work. which I love. It's just like, yeah, it's he's going to be there and he's going to be as competitive as ever. The last thing I want to mention here, in terms of the Sunday race, race two, is unfortunate, obviously, for David McKay. He ends up going down on the Honda at the exit of turn number four. Was a tough weekend for him. I thought that he was really competitive. He obviously qualified very well, but as a result of that, you ended up having in fifth Andrew Van Winkle in the Pro Superbike race on Sunday. And Phil DeBeest that you mentioned, Philip de Gama Blanchette, finishes sixth. And I also want to give a shout out here because we're all watching Ben Young. Oh, he runs away with it. Okay, Alex Dumas second. Jordan's okay. Jordan's on the podium. Congratulations. All right, Sam Grand comes home in fourth. Good job. Good points haul for BMW especially. And then you see the two young guys come through. We're all like, all right, the race is over. And over the top of the crest on the final corner heading to the front straight, it's like, whoa, there goes Connor Campbell. Like out of nowhere, just basically comes off that final corner. It's like, that is great racing to have base. And Paul McDonald was obviously the victim of that move by Connor Campbell. But having that top eight with young riders, different types of bikes, dominant champion at the front, Jordan Zoke returning to form, Sam Grand doing great on Saturday, finding points. It's like to have that top essentially 10 with that many great stories. I think that's why I came away from my first Atlantic Motorsport Park adventure, just appreciating the fact that we've got so many fun things happening in the series, not just at the top class, but especially in the GP Bikes Pro Superbike class.
Well, I think that not that long ago, a Shubenacadie race, particularly in the Pro Superbike feature class, uh, was really a battle of attrition, and there wasn't much racing past about halfway, and the riders were really spread out, and a lot of them were tired and hanging on, and it wasn't a great show. There wasn't racing to watch. There was a lot of racing to watch. You know, you
Yeah.
mentioned McKay. I think he set the sixth best lap. He was into the tens, and then Phil. He I think was the seventh best, and then you mentioned that battle that Connor came out in front of, and they've been struggling with a lot of small technical issues, but very upsetting and distracting issues with those Kawasaki. So
Yeah.
that he got something out of it and raced through the whole race has got to be an encouraging thing, because don't forget we're heading to Mosport, which is home for a lot of the people in the series, and somebody like Connor Campbell, you know, he's going to want to put on a show for his sponsors, and his bikes look great, and you know I think we'll have an interesting group of Kawasaki's. I don't want to predict too much, but there may be others who are not regulars on the series who will be joining in to wave the ninja flag. So yeah, there was a lot more to watch. There was a lot more action. It persisted till ironically past the end. You know, Ben Young had already won, and there were a couple of races going on during the last lap, which is that's what you'd like, and that's what's good for the crowd. And the announcer has something to follow, and you know, it's all fun.
I agree. It is CTMP Mosport coming up August 9th to 11th. Very excited about that. As you say, if you like wild cards, if you like fun stuff, there's a lot of names in the rumor mill right now and mixing and matching of who's going to be where and running in what class. And it's going to be a ton of fun. And as we all know, that place is a world-class facility. So we're looking forward to getting out there. I personally am just thankful that I flew home on the same flight as you, Colin. And when I landed, it was pouring rain in Ontario and not in Nova Scotia while we were there on the Sunday. So a very happy turn of events from 2023. I think everybody's very thankful that we got in a lot of fun in 2024, and now we can set our sights forward into round number 5. It's been a lot of fun. We're looking forward to seeing everybody at CTMP coming up in just a few weeks away. Colin, thank you as always, my man. We will talk to you coming up into round number 5.